Are you an overwhelmed SaaS founder ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those you don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where business works better when you stop putting out fires and start asking why the building keeps catching on fire in the first place. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. What if the way you set goals is quietly working against you? KPIs, OKRs, dashboards everywhere. From the outside, it all looks disciplined and data-driven. It's what we all want to say, right? But somehow teams still game the numbers. Real problems stay buried somewhere in those dashboards, and progress feels more performative than real. Ooh, that's kind of close to home. In this episode, we challenge the obsession with targets and unpack why chasing metrics can actually distort behavior instead of driving growth. You'll hear why measures are great for insight, but dangerous when they become judgment tools, and how well-intentioned goals can lead teams to optimize for appearances rather than outcomes. Instead, the conversation introduces a far more powerful idea, treating growth like a puzzle, not a scorecard. We dig into how curiosity beats certainty, why asking the right questions matters way more than hitting the right numbers, and how a simple observe, hypothesize, learn, and adapt loop helps teams make smarter decisions in messy real-world conditions. If you've ever hit your target and still felt like something was off, or missed a target but learned something super valuable, this episode will give you a new lens for progress, leadership, and building momentum without all the performance theater. Our founder on Tuesday was Mark Walker, CEO of New. He joined us to unpack how modern SaaS companies are rethinking revenue from the ground up. He explained why revenue should be treated as a life cycle, not as a series of disconnected handoffs, and why billing belongs at the center of the revenue stack. From unified CPQ and billing to agentic AI-powered revenue operations, Mark shared how New is helping companies eliminate leakage, move faster, and prepare for what's next. It's the billing of the future, I think. Our expert guest last week was Daniel Nikic. He brought a grounded counterpoint to all of the AI hype, reminding us that human judgment still matters, and maybe more than ever today. Drawing from decades of global experience, Daniel reframed AI as a tool, not a decision maker. He shared where blind trust and automation can quietly undermine outcomes. This was a high signal conversation on wisdom, pattern recognition, and staying human in an increasingly AI-driven world. If you missed either episode, go back and check those out. My guest today is Radhika Dutt, author of Radical Product Thinking, and one of the most thoughtful voices challenging how companies actually drive progress. Her work has reshaped how organizations in 40 countries think about innovation, decision-making, and what it really means to build products that create fundamental change. Radhika is an entrepreneur, product leader, and advisor who's participated in 5 acquisitions, including 2 companies that she's founded. She currently serves as an advisor on product thinking to the Monetary Authority of Singapore and consults with organizations ranging from early-stage startups to global multinationals. Her product experience spans everything from robotics and government systems to consumer apps and, even wine. Welcome someone who helps teams stop chasing numbers and start solving the right problems. Radhika Dutt. Hey, Radhika, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Thanks for having me here, Jeff. Excited to be here.
I am as well. Really excited about our topic today. And I think a lot of companies are obsessed with being data-driven and setting goals, KPIs, especially going into a new year. And we've got all these new initiatives and want to track everything. But your work suggests that may be backfiring. So what's going wrong with how companies use OKRs and goal setting?
Yeah, let's unpack that, right? Because you mentioned a few things in here, data-driven, and then there is KPIs and OKRs, etc. And very often when I say KPIs, goals, OKRs, that they backfire. People say, well, then are you saying we should not be data-driven, or that we shouldn't be using metrics? Right? And measurement is actually really, really important. So not using goals and targets doesn't mean that we don't measure. So one of the things that I talk about is there are laws about metrics that we already know. Like, for example, there is Goodhart's law that says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. We've known this in economics since 1975. So for 50 years, we've known this. Then there's Campbell's law, which we know from anthropology, that when a measure is used for evaluation, then it starts to become gamed. And the more you use a measure for evaluation, the more it becomes gamed, and therefore it becomes less likely as a good evaluation metric. Right? And so isn't that interesting? We've known Campbell's law and Goodhart's law for 50 years, and yet we keep setting goals and targets for metrics. So what we should do more of is we should do a lot of measurement and being data-driven. What we should not do is goals and targets for metrics. That is where they backfire. And I'll talk about why. But I invented Dutt's law just to explain what does or doesn't work. Dutt's law is just like Campbell's or Goodhart's, but Dutt's law goes, a measure is only useful as a tool for insight, not a yardstick for evaluation. So it's only good for insight, not evaluation, right? And that's a super important mindset and a different way of thinking. And we can talk more about what happens.
Why is that? Why is it good for insight but not information?
But not evaluation.
Evaluation, yes.
Yeah. So what happens is, let's say when you set a target, right, and you say, let's say, for example, increase user engagement by 5% by the end of this year.
Okay.
When you set a target, the incentive everyone has is to show you, ta-da, I've hit that target. And so everyone is going to look at the positive numbers and show you how we've increased that user engagement. But you don't look at the negative numbers to see what is actually happening. And I'm going to give you an example from real life right now. OpenAI, they introduced a version of ChatGPT in April. It was ChatGPT 4.0, but the variant of that ChatGPT 4.0 that they introduced was one that tested well for user engagement. So there was someone within the company going, oh, yay, we hit whatever number we were hoping to hit.
Right.
Right. And so they launched that. But what happened? It was a version of ChatGPT that was more sycophantic, meaning it was giving users lots of validation. Oh, yeah, you're right. Oh, that's a brilliant suggestion. Yeah, we should do that. Right? Like that sycophantic version. What ended up happening was, it turns out that sycophantic AI creates more emotional distress in people. And so New York Times has tracked that there were 9 hospitalizations, 2 deaths because of ChatGPT, and always validating users and then egging them on towards suicide or some really bad consequences, right? And so research from MIT shows that sycophantic AI is dangerous. Yet, just recently, the chief product officer sent a memo to the whole company, and this was talked about on a New York Times article. He sent a memo to the whole company saying, our newer, safer version of ChatGPT isn't getting enough user engagement. And he reminded everyone, our goal is to increase user engagement by 5% by the end of this year.
Wow.
Right? And so what they're doing, they're allowing people to decide how sycophantic you want your AI. They're giving the dial to people, even though research is saying that that is dangerous.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this is what happens. When we set targets, we're going to do whatever helps us hit those targets in the short term.
Right.
But in the long term, it might be bad for users. It might be bad for society. It might also be bad for the company, because you can only imagine that there is going to be a lot of regulation as more people and our society starts to face consequences from sycophantic AI, right? And so it's bad long-term for everyone, but having targets leads to a focus on how do I show you that I've hit those targets, as opposed to looking at the bad numbers. In this case, bad numbers are showing that people are dying from this or getting hospitalized from this. You need to look at that and say, okay, what do I do differently? Maybe that target isn't the most important thing.
Makes a lot of sense. You can get so obsessed with hitting that target that, and this happens across all sorts of businesses, whether it's maximizing revenue for this quarter, even though you're making decisions that are not good for the long-term health of the company, or maybe even the next 2 quarters.
And you're exactly right. This is what I've seen. I was working in a company where if you just looked at our sales numbers, everything looked like, wow, things are fantastic, they're on track. And if you just dug a little bit deeper into the numbers, you'd see that our low end was getting eroded, mid-tier 2. And the way we were making our numbers was by focusing more and more on the high end. But because we were making our numbers, it was hiding a lot of the negatives or what was actually happening under the hood. And so this is what happens with targets, that we tend to ignore the bad stuff that we should be looking at that indicates that there's a problem, that there's an opportunity. So regardless of the type of company or the metric, when you set targets, it creates perverse incentives.
So what do we do instead? If we don't want to do that and create those perverse incentives, what do we do instead? How do we still hit those targets or hit some target because it's important to achieve whatever that is, if it's growth or whatever the numbers are? How do we do that without the bad stuff?
Yeah. So let's talk about the solution, right? And the solution is shifting from a mindset of focusing on goals to focusing on puzzles. Now, the word puzzles isn't in our corporate vocabulary very much, right? Everyone talks about goal setting. Nobody talks about puzzle setting and puzzle solving. So why puzzles? So the first thing about puzzles is that it triggers curiosity. It triggers a mindset of questioning, asking questions. Because in a puzzle, if you already know the answers, there's no puzzle.
Right.
A puzzle genuinely indicates that there are questions we don't know the answers to, and we're going to uncover them. So let's look at an example of what I mean by puzzle setting and puzzle solving, because there's a framework for this that I talk about, and the framework is called OHLA, OHLA. It stands for Observe, Hypothesize, Learn, Adapt. So how does this work? Let's talk through an example, and using the sales example, right? So let's say you would have set a target, like achieve X million by the end of this year. In a puzzle mindset, what you would say is, the market expects us to hit X million, but here's the puzzle I see ahead of us. The problem that I see is sales grew in the last 3 years, but in the last year, sales had stalled. And now you have some open questions. So the first thing was the observation that sales had stalled in this last year, and the open questions might be things you genuinely don't know answers to. So one might be, maybe the market has shifted in some way and we haven't figured out in what way it's shifted or how it's affecting us. It might be a question of, maybe in terms of sales, we knew how to address the early adopter in terms of our messaging, but we hadn't figured out how to talk to the mass market. So maybe it's a messaging problem. Maybe it's a product problem. Maybe we knew how to address the needs of the early adopter, but our product wasn't addressing the needs of the mass market. And so these are some open questions we genuinely might not know answers to. And the third O of puzzle setting. So we talked about observation, open questions, and the third O is the objective. So the objective is the summary. And so the summary is, how do we solve this puzzle and these open questions so that we can get back to that growth trajectory that we were on? So now we have set the puzzle, right? And we've asked all these open questions that we genuinely don't know answers to. So let's go observe. We go observe what might be happening. And we might see some things, maybe that there's something happening in the market, like maybe AI has shifted the market in some way. And we didn't think AI would affect our market because we're in a very different space that's not being eaten by AI, but maybe there are secondary effects that we hadn't thought of. And this is why maybe it is affecting our market. Maybe that means that also something needs to be different in our sales messaging, right? So those are a couple of things that we might be thinking about based on our observations. Now comes the puzzle solving, right? So now we've observed the puzzle. So think of it like a Rubik's Cube. We've observed like how this thing moves. Now we're ready to make our first attempt. And so as we solve the puzzle, we hypothesize, learn, and adapt. And to do that, we ask 3 questions. So the first question is, how well did it work? So we try this attempt, right? And we check how well did it work. So in terms of sales, maybe we tried a new messaging. And now we're seeing that, great, it's resonating with more of these decision makers in the mass market. So great, it's working well. So that's the answer to the first question, how well did it work? Second question, what did we learn? So this is where I say to teams, don't just regurgitate data. Being data-driven is important. I want you to look at the data, but don't just regurgitate the data. Tell me, what is the data telling you? What have you learned from it? And so maybe what we've learned is this decision maker in the mass market, now we're getting more meetings, but we're still not closing the deal because maybe there's a new group that the decision in the mass market has to get approval from. And we'd traditionally never been talking to this group. Okay, so now we know what we've learned. So the third question, based on how well it worked and what you learned, what will you try next? So if I gave you a magic wand, what would you ask for? Right? And with this third question, this is the adaptation. So now we know, okay, well, we're getting those meetings with decision makers, but to help them get that last group on board, maybe I'm going to create a webinar so that they can invite that group and we can also start talking to this other group. And maybe we're going to create material that the decision maker can easily forward so that we can make that closing, we can close those sales a little faster. And so now we've learned how to hypothesize, learn, adapt, and now we would try this next set of things, right, that we talked about, like this new webinar and this new material for forwarding, and that forms the next puzzle that we've unlocked, and we can see how well did that work. So this is what puzzle setting and puzzle solving means, and it's very different from goal setting, right? Because goal setting might be get X number of meetings, and you're going to count all sorts of meetings, whether or not they actually are relevant.
That's absolutely right. I mean, you can see it. I mean, pipeline bloat happens all the time in sales, and this is the exact same thing. It's they wish that deals would be real, and they need something in the pipeline because they've got to hit their goal. They got to be able to show something there, and so then that everything gets counted. I really like this, the idea of puzzle solving, and even if it is, hey, we've got to hit this revenue number, there's a puzzle to solve in how you do it, and the experiments that you run to figure out how are we going to get there.
Exactly. What you said is so important because in companies, we often create, well, first of all, we set targets, and then that creates this pressure for people to prove that they've hit targets. And then we create artificial mantras to say, well, we have to embrace failure, fail fast, learn fast. But the thing is, nobody wants to fail.
Right.
We keep saying we want to create a culture where we embrace failure and blah, blah. But the very fact that we set targets makes people want to show that, look, I'm a high performer. I achieved all these targets, and not look at those bad numbers, right? Whereas think about when you move to this puzzle mindset, when you're solving a Rubik's Cube, you don't try a first attempt and go like, oh, I have to embrace failure. You just try something and then you go, oh, that didn't work. Okay, yeah, I'm going to try this because this is what I learned. If I just move this, these pieces move in this way.
Right.
Like you just sort of intuitively fail, learn, adapt. You don't explicitly go through, oh, I have to embrace failure. It's because of targets that failure is so hard. You don't want to fail in front of your whole peer group, etc. You don't want to be that person who hasn't achieved those targets. Right? And think about how that erodes collaboration. Like I often see in companies where there's one team that has a particular OKR to meet, and another team is trying to hit another OKR. And for a company, it might be important that this team needs the other team's help. And they might even go ask that team for help. They go like, yeah, but we have these numbers that we have to hit. We can help you in the next quarter. Whereas maybe that company would have benefited from that collaboration right now.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a fundamental understanding of how things are not linked together, or even goal setting at the top, and really choosing the key initiatives, and everybody working together to achieve those instead of them everybody doing their own things or having their own numbers. But it's really like that again, kind of that puzzle to solve. Again, if we're trying to solve it together, that's very different than you're working on a puzzle and we're working on a different puzzle and we don't have time to help you.
Yeah, exactly. And to that, right, there might be people who would say, well, that just means don't set a goal. You're just setting the
Right.
wrong goals for different teams, right? They'll say, well, just set an initiative and everyone is working towards this initiative. Yes, sure. That's a simplistic approach. Again, the other problem with even saying this is you might say this is the right initiative for the company, but let's say 3 months from now, you realize actually this initiative that we started on, what actually it turns out these are the complete wrong metrics we are chasing.
Yeah. That happens a
And it
lot.
happens. Exactly. It happens a lot. When you set goals initially, the mindset with which you're setting goals is I already know this is the problem, this is the solution. Therefore, if you just hit these numbers, it is progress. But the reality is, you might discover things along the way. And well, to that, a lot of people might say, okay, great. Well, that just means set goals more often, do it every quarter instead of every year. But I've seen this happen in companies where it's like, great, if I have to set goals every quarter and coordinate this across all the functions, we would just die. Like, it is hard to do that in large companies. It's hard to do it once a year, let alone doing
Right.
it every quarter. This is a huge time sink, right? But instead, imagine you apply this puzzle based mindset. You start to give teams the flexibility and you start doing course corrections as you're solving these puzzles. You might talk, first of all, you create alignment in terms of what is the puzzle we're solving,
Yeah.
and then you create course corrections along the way. It's a much more agile way of working.
I like that. And you really avoid the performance theater of everybody trying to look good in front of their peers and not be the one that is not hitting their goals.
Exactly.
Why is that especially damaging like in product-led organizations?
The performance theater that you often see, right, that leads to short term behaviors.
Hmm.
It often leads to doing things that work in the short term, but not necessarily in the long term. And it often leads to jumping into solutioning. And I'll give you an example. So, what do I mean by jumping into solutioning? If we think about just what we've been taught in about building products, right? Lean startup, it's often shortened into the mantra of build, test, learn, scale. But the first word is build. The
Right.
idea is throw things in the market, you build, you test it, you learn, you keep scaling, right? But it starts with solutioning. Even though, if when you read the book does talk about, well, you have to identify the problem first. The reality is, this is not what companies actually do. It is always starting with, oh, let's just try this experiment first. We'd want to jump to solutions. And why is that? It's because being in the solution space just feels more comfortable.
Sure.
To say, I do not know, right? To be in the problem space, it's much more uncomfortable. So we want to jump to solutions. Solutions feels like I'm doing something. There is action, right? And that feels like this is progress. And so if we look at this whole mindset of puzzle setting and puzzle solving, when I say you have to ask these open questions around an observation, and then you really have to observe first before you hypothesize, that helps you make a much more effective first attempt at solving the puzzle. So here's the example and what I was referring to in terms of performance theater. There was a company that I've been working with, and when I first started working with them, we were looking at data in terms of who is using the product and what can we improve. And the data was basically saying, oh, everyone who's using the product is working on creating these lists using our platform. It's a data platform. So they were creating these lists using data. And the thing that they struggle with the most is creating filters for the list. Okay, so it seems like the solution should be obvious. If we want to get more people to use it, and the biggest problem they're saying is filtering this list, well, let's just make the filtering better.
Right. Seems logical.
And so, exactly. And so our desire is to look at data and jump to the solution. And this is what would happen in most companies. This is what we're taught to do. But here's the trick. I was saying, let's first look at the observation and let's stick with the open questions for a moment. So the observation was, it's the tech savvy people who are using our platform. And the second part of the observation is that there's a certain role that was using our platform more. It was the brokers. So this was a maritime industry platform, but the brokers in the maritime industry were using this product, but not the other roles in the industry. Okay,
Interesting.
not the other roles and tech savvy people. Why? So the open questions were, well, why aren't the tech averse people using it? Why aren't people in other roles using it? So before jumping into filtering, I said, let's just go observe these other people. So we did that. We observed these other people. And what we found, it turns out that these people in these other roles don't even create lists. They don't want to deal with lists. Right? So even if we had improved filtering, it turns out that because those other roles, those people don't even create lists, it would not have mattered to them. You could have made filtering so much better, but they would not have cared. So even though the data was telling us that filtering was the biggest problem, yes, filtering was the biggest problem for our current users, the tech-savvy brokers. If we wanted to expand, and that was where the largest opportunity was, following what the data said would have done nothing for targeting that wider opportunity. And by doing this puzzle setting and puzzle solving approach, by looking at this observation and open questions, etc., and then puzzle solving, then we were able to address that bigger market of the tech-averse users and other roles. And this is how we doubled sales in 2024 and again in 2025.
Oh, that's really, really good. Very insightful because you're looking at what the data isn't telling you. So not just taking it at face value. And I think leaders probably have a big challenge with this because they ask questions, their people go and they get the answers and bring them back. Oh, well, obviously we just need more filters. Go build filters because that's what the data said. But it's not really looking at the bigger picture and what's missing. What's the just like you said, what's the puzzle to be solved? What's the real issue behind that?
Exactly. And the performance illusion, right, is the jumping into actions. We would have totally, like, if we were following this approach of just focusing on targets, we would have totally looked at just data, said, okay, filtering is the solution.
Yeah.
We would have jumped to action. And for all of leadership, jumping into action, doing things, building a feature, putting it out there, that would have felt like, okay, we're constantly experimenting, iterating, etc. And in
Yeah.
fact, instead, what we needed to do was do the uncomfortable stuff. Ask those questions like, wait a minute, what are those other roles doing? How do they think? We don't know the answers to that. How do they behave that's different from these tech savvy brokers? Right? And when we were asking these open questions, people in our sales team, and when we were asking for those meetings with the people who are tech averse in other roles, our salespeople were like, guys, you should already know the answers to this. Like, you're asking all these basic questions, right? This is the kind of problems we
Right.
have in SaaS companies, especially in B2B, where we feel like, oh, you should already know these answers.
Right.
Oh, it's too hard to get those customer interviews, right? We had those same problems.
What if a leadership book and a Netflix drama had a baby? That is The Captain's Keys, Storms, Emotional Wreckage, and a surprisingly practical leadership system that one CEO called the owner's manual and never got for 20 years of leadership. Here is the brutal truth. You're probably drowning in LinkedIn connections while starving for real relationships. I hear it all the time. Most leaders are exhausted from playing the lone hero, and it's killing both your results and your sanity. The Captain's Keys reveals a new leadership framework, the stability matrix, 4 specific relationships that prevent burnout while multiplying your impact. And this isn't just theory. It's a system that I've used to scale companies and taught over 1,000 executive leaders. So grab your copy today at thecaptainskeys.com, Amazon, or choose your own adventure. Print, ebook, or audio. Stop drowning alone and build your stability matrix. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And it's some of it is the curse of knowledge, and some of it I think is just we think we know, and so we don't ask the question, we don't go deeper, and just like you said, it's hard to get those meetings. Well, let's get them anyway.
Right. And so interesting. So this is what we had to do. So we had to first beg for the first few meetings, right? And in those first few meetings, we could see that the customer maybe wasn't engaged at the beginning of the meeting. But we had really done our homework where we, first of all, met with friendly customers who saw the value in our platform. And we just had sessions where we observed them, right? And
Okay.
observed them at their desktop, how they were working. We got a chance not just to see how they're using our platform, but seeing what they actually do in their job. So, what their workflow looks like. And a lot of insights that we got was not just how they're using our platform, but what they do outside our platform. And by sitting beside them and just watching them at their desktop, I was able to ask questions like, "Oh, you just opened Excel. What did you do there?
Oh, that's
Why
good.
did you open Excel?" And so by seeing and observing all of this, we already were more informed. Then we had more of those meetings with those other users, right? That were very hard to get those meetings, but we were well informed. So when we went in there, we sometimes only got half an hour meetings or 45-minute meetings at most. But we started asking interesting questions about their workday. And sometimes we even showed them an early prototype. And that made them feel like, oh, you guys are asking interesting questions. They could now start to see value
Yeah.
that they could help shape the platform. And so our 30-minute meeting became at the end, if you like this and you'd like to help us design this so that it really helps you become more efficient in your work, maybe let's say or the next week or the week after, would you mind taking another meeting with us and we can show you more of these prototypes and we can ask you more questions. So this way we could get that next meeting and the next meeting, and we were able to build the relationship with those customers. And this is how you can continue to build a user base with whom you can run this exploratory set of conversations so you can do the observation before you hypothesize, learn, and adapt.
So good. And just another example, if you weren't sitting there and you didn't see him open Excel, it's not something you're going to get from a screen capture tool or session viewing or an
Exactly.
interview, just asking them questions. I mean, it's actually just being with them and understanding how is it you're using it. What does your workday look like?
And I think that is such an interesting and important point. One of my biggest learnings, and this is not something that I've ever read anywhere, but the more your users are tech averse, one, but the more their mental model differs from your mental model, the more you need to observe them in person as opposed to doing it online, right? It's fascinating. So I was working in a robotics company once, and a lot of our end users were people who were not engineers, right? Whereas all of us building this robotic stuff were
Of
engineers.
course.
And so our users were a very different, they had a very different mental model. Their way of working, what they cared about, their incentives, that was very different. And so we thought that they operated in a certain way. We were doing certain things that seemed so logical for us. But once we went there in person, we were like, ah, now we understand. And we had to think very differently about what we put in front of them as a user interface.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think that we've probably all had experiences where we're working with something, or see something, or experience a product, and like whoever built this has never used one of these before. And it's one of those things of just it's a different mindset. It is a different mental model, and where if you have an engineer that's what they know and that's how they think, and it's of course it makes sense for engineering, but for the end user, some things maybe are not as intuitive, or they don't get it because they are coming from a different direction.
This was one of the most important points that this company took away in working with me, that when you're building a SaaS product, growth in SaaS comes not from getting your users to adopt your mental model, but rather growth comes from knowing and understanding your end users' mental models, and then building a product that matches those mental models.
That's good.
And one of the things that one would argue is, and I often hear this, they say, well, if Henry Ford had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses or something like that, right? And it's a bunch of bullshit, because here's why. It's not that you ever want to ask your users what they want or what they need. That's not what you do. You really have to observe how they behave, their mental models in how they work. And then you build something that matches those mental models. And even if you want to give them a faster car or a better car, you still have to understand their mental models. Like, what are they trying to do? If they want to go faster, well, okay, you hit the gas pedal here, but how do you make that more intuitive? If they want to, like, whatever they want to do, what are their mental models? But in SaaS, these things are more obvious in cars. And by the way, this is a huge gripe I have with Tesla's user interface. Tesla's user interface absolutely sucks. It's created by a company who thinks they're so cool because they're going to disrupt how cars are made and how we don't want any buttons, this clean interface, that everything is done from the screen. For anyone who is switching from any car to a Tesla, that interface absolutely sucks. Because if you want to turn on windshield wipers, it does it automatically. Well, what if you want to speed it up or slow it down? And what if there's something wrong with how the car is sensing something? If you have a crack in the windshield, sometimes it triggers windshield wipers. They've designed it so that you would then have to go to the screen and fiddle with the screen, as opposed to doing things with controls while you're driving, right? Mental models that they've not thought about. But in SaaS, this becomes a much bigger issue, because people can choose not to use your product or use it in ways where they don't need your product as much. So the utility out of your product is less, and therefore the value of your product from their perception is less, and therefore you can't charge as much for it.
That makes a lot of sense. When you look at an organization, is going from KPIs and goal setting, OKRs, is that something that you see coming more from the top down, or is it more kind of grassroots from the bottom up? How have you seen it work best?
So what I've seen work best is an approach where it's really a mix of both. So let's first talk about the leadership side. Because the biggest fear for leaders, even when I've pointed out all of these issues with setting targets, leaders often say to me, well, but OKRs or targets, that's the devil I know. What do you propose instead? And it feels too scary to say, well, forget OKRs, just move to puzzle setting and puzzle solving, because they've never used this before. So the way I approach this with leaders is I say, these are the downsides with OKRs, but I'm not going to ask you to switch away from them. Because one of the biggest fears that leaders have, aside from just what does this mean for my team? I've never used this before. One big fear that they have is, does my team have enough competence in being able to set and solve puzzles? Will I lose control of what they're working on as a result of this switch? OKRs give you the illusion of control, because you set an initiative, you say, here's what I want to see, and everyone is then presenting numbers against that. It gives you this illusion of control. But the reality is they're showing you what you hope to see, and which is why Andy Grove at Intel, the legendary CEO, he wrote a book, Only the Paranoid Survive, and one of the things he says is, leaders are the last to know. Leaders are the last to know because everyone shows you what you want to see.
Yep.
And so what I say to leaders is, okay, even if you're using OKRs, what we're going to do as a product team is we're going to present progress to you in a slightly different way. And so I work with teams to set puzzles, and we align with leadership on what are the puzzles that we're going to go after. And then with the product teams, I work on solving those puzzles. So we have these learning meetings where product teams present how things are going on their particular product in this format of how well did it work? What have we learned? What will we try next? And based on that, I start seeing how well are they solving the puzzle? And I can give them direct feedback. I can see what they've learned and then maybe the next experiment that they want to try in terms of what will we try next. And I give them feedback. And as I can see that the team is really getting more comfortable with puzzle solving, then in monthly business reviews, the team shares this information of how well is it working? What have we learned? What will we try next with leadership teams? And this is where you have really insightful conversations between the teams and leadership. And now the next phase is basically leaders start to sense that, oh, now I have real control. So the company that I've been working with on using this puzzles approach, the CEO who had brought in OKRs initially, he completely changed his mind after seeing puzzles. Because what he said was, puzzles, I can see, it gives you the ears on the ground. You can anticipate what's coming and therefore measurement becomes more actionable. Whereas OKRs, they're like a view in the rearview mirror that you could see basically whether you hit the target or not, but it's not as actionable.
Right. Yeah, you can't change the past.
And so this is how you can start to use this both as a leadership team and as whether individual contributors or middle management, like wherever you are, you can start to approach this in a puzzle mindset.
I like that. Well, your first book, Radical Product Thinking, introduced the idea of being vision driven instead of iteration led. And again, this is another flip, which I really, really like the concept. Yeah, how does that also fit into your OHLA? Is it OHLA framework?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, great question. So, one of the first things that we need to do is set direction, whether we're leaders or even heading up a product, right? We need to set the direction. And in setting the direction, we all know, yeah, we need a vision. But what we've learned until now that a vision has to be broad, aspirational, unchanging, right? And this is where we write vision statements like to be the leader in blah, blah. I remember I worked at a robotics company and our vision was reinventing warehousing. Or even in a startup that I had, right? Our vision was revolutionizing wireless. Well, these vision statements that are so broad, it doesn't even tell you what is the problem you're setting out to solve.
Right.
And without that clarity, you don't even have a filter. So when you hold up a feature against your vision, when you say to be the leader in data storage, right? Anything goes. Like, yeah, sure, let's do this. Yeah, let's also do this. And so a good vision, and this is the radical product thinking approach, is a fill in the blank statement. And that fill in the blank statement helps you define a lot of details. It helps you address whose problem are you solving? What is their problem? Why does it need to be solved? Because maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
Maybe the status quo is just fine, and in which case there's no reason for your product. Then you can talk about what does the world look like when you're done, and then finally, this is finally where we've earned the right to talk about our product, how we are going to bring it about. I can talk through an example if that's helpful.
Yes, that would be helpful.
So I'll give an example of a SaaS product where we were working on, actually, I won't even tell you what the product was about. I'll just give you the vision statement and you'll see what it was about. Okay, this is the fill in the blank statement in the Radical Product Thinking book. Today, when salespeople who are working in TV advertising who need to create quotes for a campaign, and they have to pick out audience segments and figure out which TV programs would best target that audience. Today, those people have to use a variety of different data sources and then wait to get data from these different sources and then combine all of this information and then figure out which programs to advertise on. This is unacceptable because this is a very long and painful process. And if we don't improve it, TV advertising is going to die out as a market compared to digital advertising, which is very efficient. we are bringing about this world, the world we envision is one where TV advertising is really competitive and we can target audiences really effectively, and salespeople can create very effective quotes that gives marketers confidence in being able to target those audiences effectively. And the way we're bringing this about is through a data platform that helps you pick data from different sources and instantly match and see which TV programs would work best to advertise to those sources so that you can create quotes very quickly. So now you see that I told you nothing about our product, about the SaaS product, which, by the way, is really complicated, right? And yet you knew exactly, hopefully, what we were doing and why we were doing it. And that is what makes it a powerful vision.
That's really, really good. And it is. It's something that people can grab onto. They understand that because you're kind of taking them through. It could also be an elevator pitch, but you're kind of taking them through the story of, if here's the way things are today, here's where we're inserted, and here's what the future looks like with us. And I think that's something everybody can grasp and get behind, and they understand where it is we're going. I think it's so much better.
Exactly. A lot of people think that, or this is what conventional wisdom tells us, right? That your vision has to be short and memorable. And this is why traditionally, for the same product, you might have written a vision like revolutionizing TV ad sales quotes, right? But that would have been a bullshit vision that doesn't really tell you what is the problem and how are you solving it and
Right.
what does the end state look like. But in this case, when I tell you a vision that is so detailed, right? When you buy into my vision and you've understood what I said, I bet you could describe the same vision to me in your words as opposed to repeating a tagline, right?
Right.
And what is
Right.
really important on a team is for you to be able to share the same vision in your words, because that means you've internalized it as opposed to repeating a slogan.
Oh, that's really good. And you're right. And when they can repeat that back and it has the core message, but it is in their own words, then they own it. And I think that's where you
Yes.
really get deep buy-in and commitment to the vision.
Exactly. And you used a keyword there. They own it.
Yeah.
Right. And so this vision starts with that ownership. And now, and you'd asked me, how does the work that I'm doing now related to puzzle setting and puzzle solving, how does it relate to radical product thinking and this vision statement? So radical product thinking talks about not just the vision, but how do you translate it into a detailed strategy and into priorities. And it's very similar in that it helps you take ownership at each step. But in terms of this puzzle setting and puzzle solving, what I like to say is there's this wonderful quote, man plans, God laughs.
Yes. Yeah.
So you might have the best vision, the best strategy. When you put it into action, you discover there are all sorts of obstacles. Things aren't going the way that you had originally planned, right? And so when you run into obstacles, those are the puzzles that you have to solve. You have to figure out actually what is working, what is not working, constantly solve those puzzles so that you can achieve that vision and strategy. What we do traditionally is we just set goals and targets to say, okay, I want to achieve this, and that's how we think we're going to achieve that vision and strategy. But goals and targets sort of make you complacent. Like, to give you that example of sales, if you show that I'm hitting all of my sales numbers, you think things are going well. On the other hand, things were not going well. We needed to look at those bad numbers, never get complacent. We needed to
Right.
constantly solve that puzzle. So this is how the two concepts are connected. And that key piece that you mentioned, taking ownership, right? When you set a goal, people feel the sense of obligation that you've set this goal for me. I have to show you that I've hit that goal. Whereas when you set a puzzle and you want to set and solve puzzles, I feel ownership of that puzzle. It's a
Yeah.
puzzle I want to solve. It's solving puzzles is driven out of an internal desire. As humans, as high performers, we want to solve puzzles, right?
Yeah.
There's excitement about it. And that ownership, you translate all the way from taking ownership with a vision to taking ownership and solving the puzzles, overcoming obstacles, and delivering on the vision and strategy.
So good. So good. Well, for SaaS founders that are listening, what's one mindset shift they can make this week to start reducing performance theater and building with clarity instead of chaos?
So for leaders, here's one thing you can do. You can introduce this OHLA approach to your team. And the way you could do this is think about an initiative that you've taken on this year. This is a fantastic time for reflection. And we can reflect on experience and we can think about that initiative in terms of what was the puzzle we were setting out to solve. And you can think about that puzzle that you had set for yourself in the form of what was the observation, the open questions you were trying to address, right? And then once you've set this definition of this puzzle, think about this last year and that initiative and answer those 3 questions for yourself. It'll give you just muscle memory in terms of puzzle setting and puzzle solving. Think about those 3 questions of how well did it work? What have you learned from all the things that you tried in that initiative? What are the things that worked, that didn't work? What did you learn from all of that?
Mm.
And then the third question, what will you do next? Like, this is a fantastic time for reflecting and planning that next set of actions for next year, for 2026. And so now that you have this approach, you can share this with your team as a leader, right? And in doing that, you're being vulnerable, but you're also role modeling it for your team. You're showing them to think deeply. We're inviting both the good and the bad in answering how well did it work. You're not saying, did you or didn't you hit this target? You're asking both the good and the bad. Tell me what you're seeing is working, what is not working. What did you learn from this? What will you do next? And if you role model this for a past initiative, and then in 2026, you can invite your team to share answers with you in the same format. Work with them one-on-one. You'll know exactly how much scaffolding and handholding each team or each person on the team needs based on the answers to these questions, right? You'll know exactly how well they're solving the puzzle. It'll give you true insights as a leader, as opposed to just hearing what you wanted to hear, what people hope, or sorry, let me try that again. If you're setting targets, people will share with you what they think you want to hear. Whereas if you set puzzles and show them how to puzzle solve, they'll give you the real answers from the trenches, which is what you actually want. So this is how you can introduce them to this even this week.
So good. Well, where can people learn more about you online and, of course, get their copy of Radical Product Thinking?
So first of all, you can get my first book, Radical Product Thinking. It's on Amazon and in bookstores anywhere. So Radical Product Thinking came out in 2021, so it's a known book. And then you can also download the OHLA toolkit for free. It's on the Radical Product Thinking website. And OHLA is going to be the topic of the next book that I'm working on at the moment.
Exciting.
So people can thank you. I'm excited about writing this. So they can download the OHLA toolkit. And as you're using this toolkit, you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Send me a ping on LinkedIn. Just message me. I'm very easy to reach. And I would love to hear about your experiences because as I write this book, I'm happy to include SaaS examples as case studies as well. So feel free to reach out. And also people are welcome to reach out to me about learning about corporate workshops or consulting.
Outstanding. We'll make sure and link that in the show notes. It's been super, super helpful today. I mean, so many great things to think about. I love puzzle setting, puzzle solving. It's something that we've implemented into our organization and really excited about hearing feedback and what other people are doing with this. So Radhika, thank you for being on SaaS Fuel.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. It was great to be here.
Thanks again, Radhika, for coming on the show and sharing your insights and resources. You can learn more about Radhika and her book and all of her work at radicalproduct.com. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And be sure to check us out on YouTube as well. It's at Champion Leadership. You know, thought leaders share. Share this episode with the operator who secretly runs the company while everyone else takes credit on LinkedIn. I've been around a few people like that. Fantastic, awesome people. Everyone who shares this week gets a stealth promotion. No title change, no raise, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing you're the real reason that things work. How do you scale a creator economy platform after building it from the engineering side? Well, next up, Ryan Devanham, CEO of Grin, joins us to share his journey from software engineer to leading AI and data at Qualtrics through its $8 billion SAP acquisition, and then helping Route scale to $100 million in revenue. And now he is running the world's leading creator management platform. You got to check that out. It's very, very cool stuff. And then 1 week from today, what if technical experts were finally given the influence they deserve? Well, Alistair Gordon will be with us, and he is the founder of Expertunity. He joins us to challenge how organizations treat subject matter experts. With decades of experience coaching SMEs globally, Alistair shares why technical specialists are the ones keeping the lights on and how they can break out of their technical bubble to increase impact, influence, and satisfaction. It's absolutely fascinating discussion. Well, I will see you next time, and as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/saasfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.